Well, God bless you as you join us here online this morning. We're so stoked that you're tuning in with us today. Do me a favor, would you share this live stream right now? If you choose to do so, thank you for getting the word out there. We really appreciate that. Granted, it's a little different over the month of July as we go through our summertime series of At the Movies. Once again, we cannot live stream the message because of the movie clips that we integrate into it. These clips, they all tell a story, kind of like how Jesus told parables. He was an amazing storyteller. And that's why we do At the Movies as a creative way to share much deeper truths from the scriptures. Today, we'll be taking a deeper dive into the real-life story of Jay Moriarty from Santa Cruz, California. As a young kid growing up on the beaches of California, you can only imagine what quickly sparked his interest: surfing. So get amped, get totally stoked, because we're in for an epic ride, bro. All right, enough of that. All right, but it's been said, surfing is life. The rest is just details. For young Jay, he was trying to figure out the details of life. You see, his dad, who was an airborne ranger in the military, he packed up and he left. He left Jay's mom, behind. His mom had a hard time coping with her husband leaving them, as one would. So she fell into frequent times of depression, and she looked to numb the pain by picking up the bottle. This left Jay to figure out, well, the details of life somewhat for himself. And that's where his quest in surfing really began. Have you ever pondered the question, is there more to life? I know that I have. I've grappled with this question in many ways and in many moments of my life, whether it was an intersection of life that put me on pause, sitting at a red light, waiting for what I thought was next, or whether it was in the aftermath of sorrow where my soul was hurting and feeling and needing and crying out for answers to the questions, why? I've also thought about the meaning of life soon after great joys or victories, when the rush of adrenaline and dopamine wears off and I'm left to go back to the mundane things of life. Is there more to life has been a question that has swirled around up in my mind, in the recesses all of my mind, as I've experienced seasons of loneliness or even seasons of weariness. This question hits me. It's a big question that seems to rise up from the depths of all of our humanity. It touches other big questions like, who am I? Why am I here? What happens when I'm gone? Where did I come from and where am I going? How should I live life? A man by the name of Solomon, he searched for answers to all of these kinds of questions. And he wrote down a number of his thoughts as they are now recorded in the Bible. It's been said that outside of Jesus Christ, that Solomon was the wisest man to ever live the earth. It's an interesting title to have. Nonetheless, he wrote in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, starting in verse 10, I've seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. So that means you're beautiful. Just saying. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. That is God's gift to mankind. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it, so that people fear before him. That which is already has been, that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away. So Solomon's thesis, if you will, or his idea, is first that God, first and foremost, is real, and that he is the creator. According to Solomon, and according to many other writers who are recorded in the Bible, an ancient text of writings that came together over 3 continents by 40 authors in over 1,500 years, you and I, we're not random masses of matter. In fact, God was very intentional on creating you and me and all of humanity. The Bible answers the question of our origin. Where did I come from? And the answer that the Bible gives us, you and I, came from God. We came from the mind and the hand of God. Ephesians 2:10 says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." We seem to love origin stories as a society. Like for our characters in movies and comic books, we want to know where they came from and why. So now we have all these backstories kind of in our comic books and movies about the genesis of our superheroes and villains, informing us about their identities and how they formed and the motivations of why they became who they became and what they do. It's fun to find those things out, but it leads to a greater kind of pursuit within us. We all are on this quest to find out, like, who are we and where did we come from? I just found out that I'm actually the real Spider-Man. Who knew? Okay, just kidding. Don't sign off. I'm playing. But point is, it's interesting to find out where things come from. Did you know that the word music comes from Greek mythology? It comes from the muses, or Greek goddesses of the arts and the sciences. Ever hear the phrase "as American as apple pie"? Well, I didn't know this, but according to the American Pie Council, I didn't know that we had one of those, by the way, pie also came from ancient Greece. It's crazy, right? I mean, I've always thought it was an American invention. We think we know the origin story for airplanes and the first flight, but actually, I was mistaken about this. It wasn't the Wright brothers who actually flew first. It was a guy from New Zealand named Richard Pierce who actually flew for about 350 yards before his vessel touched down. How about the origin of Mother's Day? Did you know it was birthed from a lady who wanted to honor her mom's life and sacrifice? Anna Jarvis was born in 1864 in Grafton, West Virginia, and saw with her own eyes the aftermath of the Civil War. Her mom, Anna Maria Reeves Jarvis, had done all that she could to organize women to nurse wounded soldiers from both the North and the South. After the war, Anna Maria started Mother's Friendship Days to reconcile families that had been divided by this great conflict that our nation went through many years ago. Similarly, today, we are in a place of great divide. Maybe it just takes some people to get people together and reconcile some stuff, right? But through her life, Anna Maria gave up her dreams of college to take care of her husband and her 4 kids. And she taught Sunday school in the Methodist Church for over 20 years, and she actively helped in benevolent work in charity. She passed away in 1905, which devastated her daughter. 2 years later, her daughter got the idea to found a holiday remembering her mother and every mother whom she felt could never be thanked enough for all that they invested into their kids. Mother's Day was celebrated in 1908 in Grafton, where Anna grew up, and then in Philadelphia, where she lived as an adult. Later, in a resolution passed on May 8th in 1914, the U.S. Congress officially established the second Sunday in May as Mother's Day. I didn't know there was such a backstory to all of that. It's origins. Where do we come from? If we don't figure that one out, then it's kind of hard to figure out some of the other questions. It's kind of like the foundation that unravels some of the questions that we have in life when we find out, well, where do we come from? Some of those other questions that stem off of that is, who am I? If I don't know where I came from, how do I figure out who I really am? We live in a world today that's really confusing. To be quite honest, the world has always been a bit confusing. It's always been a bit chaotic. We're constantly bombarded with different ideas of who we're supposed to be. Maybe you grew up in a family and your parents constantly had different ideas of who you're supposed to be. Or maybe your friends, through peer pressure, when you're growing up as a kid, influenced you to be something or to try something or to do something that was really against kind of the fabric of your design of who you were. Regardless, now we have so many different cultural messages pumped into us, into the airwaves that our ears pick up and our eyes see all over the place, trying to tell us who we are, trying to tell us who we're supposed to be. Solomon uses the phrase, we're the children of man. This idea denotes more than just the concept of human beings. It points to the deeper truth of our belonging and origin that comes from God. The Bible tells us that we are made in the image of God, and thus we can look to God as image bearers and find our identity. Rather than finding our identity through our own self-perception, because that's what we try to do. We try to perceive ourselves through the lens of ourselves. But God would rather us look through his lens. We can find our identity through God-centered perspective rather than our own perceptions that's based off of the little that we really do know in this life. If I didn't put myself here on this earth and God did, then I want to know why. I want to know why he did that for me. I want to know how he expects me to live. I want to know who it is that I am and why I'm here on this earth and what am I doing here? Why do I exist? That's the purpose question. For young Jay, he was definitely trying to figure this one out. He didn't really have anyone to teach him, so he found his own teacher, Frosty. Now, I'm not talking about a snowman, and I'm not talking about that amazing shake that you can get at Wendy's. Frosty was the guy that Jay picked to teach him how to surf. Frosty obliged, but didn't plan on just teaching Jay how to surf. He taught Jay about life and what life really is all about. He taught him that life goes well beyond the physical, but you have to establish the mind as well. Not only that, you have to understand your emotions, but it doesn't stop there. You also have to grow spiritually. And Frosty kind of took Jay under his wing and started to teach him all about life. Listen, if you're chalking life up to real lack of meaning, or just some random globs of flesh that live and then die and then nothing, well, it's kind of hopeless. And it's kind of hard just to figure out, well, what do I do with my life then? I think life is a lot more than just meaningless existence. Solomon, he had a lot to say about this. He wrote that God the Creator made everything beautiful in its time, meaning everything that God makes has a purpose and a fit and the ability to produce beauty in this life. It's your why. Why do you exist? You see, we're all looking for meaning. What is your why? We get caught up going after the whys in life that ultimately don't fulfill us, though. Those are the endless pursuits that we give ourselves to. We get caught up copycatting other people because you think that their happiness is also going to now be your happiness. You get caught up doing things the conventional way because that's how it's always been done. You get caught up never really asking the deeper questions of life and just kind of existing. You're surviving, but you're not thriving. Why? Why are you here, though? What's your purpose? Have you thought deeper? Have you went deeper? Purpose should not have to be about accolades or achievements or approval or acceptance. It's not really why we live. It's not for what can I win, the name that I can have, the approval from everybody else. That really actually takes away purpose in our lives because we start going after those things rather than living on purpose and in purpose. Purpose is more about honor, doing what you're designed or called or asked to do because it's good, it's right, it's meaningful. You want to live a life of honor, honoring God, honoring others, and honoring how God's created you to live. Listen, we so often celebrate the 15 minutes of fame nowadays over lifespans of honor. It's not about getting credit, getting praise. It's about honoring your maker and honoring those that are around you. That's really where you're going to find purpose in this life. Justin Block wrote an article that reads, out of 26,639 people who completed the 2016 Boston Marathon, 72-year-old Fran Drodst finished 26,639. She was dead last. The roaring crowds and the official coronations, he writes, had departed. Workers were still tearing down the stands and the barricades, and she crossed the finish line at 8:45 p.m. The real story is not her last place finish. It's about who she was running for. You see, Drodz has run in more than 75 marathons throughout her life. That's amazing. She ran the Boston Marathon that year for the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. See, her husband, who was currently battling cancer himself for the third time, met her with a medal at the finish line. He called the police earlier in the day thinking that his wife might have gotten lost or hurt because of how last place she came in. But one media reporter later wrote, it turns out that this race's loser is actually quite the winner. Wow. You see, sometimes our last place is really the first place in the eyes of God. That's why Jesus even says the last will be first and the first will be last. Because we can make life about coming in first all the time, but if you've destroyed all your relationships to get there first, if you sold out for lesser motivations like money or approval or popularity to get to first place, like, is that really meaningful? Are you really going to be okay with that? Is your soul really not going to remind you of all the hurt that you've done? You see, success, you can get it anywhere. But significance is a whole other story. God calls us to a life of significance, not just grabbing for success. Life really doesn't matter if you're not living for the right audience. The audience that you and I, that we're living for, really is a one-person large audience. It's God himself. You're living for the audience of one. He has made you with purpose, on purpose, and for purpose. And we are going to have to share about the purpose of our lives. One day before him, we're going to have to give a report. He brings you through the classrooms of this life to understand more about his purposes and his purposes for your life. But in order to figure out your purpose, you have to be in pursuit of the purpose giver himself. It's Jesus Christ. It's God. Your purpose goes well beyond the here and the now. It touches eternity. Solomon wrote in this that God made everything beautiful in its time, but he also has inserted eternity into the hearts of humanity. That intuitive sense that the time and space that we live in, called now, is not all there is. There's more. Our hearts long for more. We yearn for more. What we know and experience here on this earth is, well, unable to satisfactorily remedy this desire that goes deep to the core of our very existence. And we search for what only can ever be truly fulfilled on the other side of glory. And with this sense, we live a bit unsettled. We realize that all of our achievements, all of our dreams, all of our pleasures and pursuits, they don't really satisfy our soul. Our soul gets hungry for more, and they have a tendency to fade away. In his essay, The Weight of Glory, C.S. Lewis, he elaborates on this, and he says the books or the music in which we thought the beauty of life was located will betray us if we give our trust to them. It's not in them. It only came through them. And what came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of the worshipers. For they are not the thing in itself They're only the scent of a flower that we have not found, the echo of a tune that we have not yet heard, news from a country that we have never yet visited. There's beauty in the here and now. But the beauty in the here and now, it points to the beauty of what's beyond. That's what C.S. Lewis was trying to communicate to us. That there's longing that gets awakened, there's desire that gets awakened in the human soul. But its fulfillment goes somewhere that we have not fully tasted of yet, not something we've fully heard yet, seen yet. C.S. Lewis writes in a book that he wrote, Mere Christianity. He also writes this. He says, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for desires exists. A baby feels hunger. Well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there is such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can actually satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. If that is so, I must take care then, on the one hand, never to despise or be unthankful for these earthly blessings. And on the other hand, never to mistake them for something else of which they are only a kind of copy or an echo or a mirage. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main, must not make it the main object of life to press on to that other country and help others to do the same. We are all on a journey, but who are you traveling with? See, there's a destination that we're all headed to, and that's the throne of God. And it's in this place that he will deem where our final destination is, with him for eternity or separated from him for eternity. 2 Corinthians 5:10 says, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or evil. It's not based on your good works that you can be saved, not even by your achieving your purpose. Really, the only way that you and I can be saved is by the grace of Jesus Christ. So even the idea of what we do, good or evil, or the purpose of our lives, the judgment seat of Christ, God's gonna talk about those things to us. But that's not where we get saved. We get saved by the acceptance of what Jesus did on the cross for us. For Jay, his whole pursuit came to chasing mavericks, or waves that were larger than life that people thought were a myth and an impossibility to surf. We can spend a lot of time in our lives searching and pursuing wonderful things. Solomon said that we should go after good works, the enjoyment of eating and drinking and enjoying our work. That's a gift from God. But there's more than just that. That's incomplete. The one guy that I find very interesting in the scripture is a man named Peter. I think Peter was on a quest to figure out what life was all about. You see, Jesus of Nazareth found him on the beaches of the Sea of Galilee one day. He was mending his nets with his brother after a long and unfruitful night of fishing. I'm sure he was aggravated and frustrated because his work proved unsuccessful. It seemed like it was an entire waste. Ever feel that way? Ever feel that all you did and all you tried to do was just a waste? I certainly have. But stick in there, because God never lets anything go to waste. In fact, for Peter, it was an opportunity to be called into greater purpose. You see, as he was mending those nets, Jesus was teaching from his boat, and then Jesus is like, hey, come on the boat with me, Peter, and I want you to go out to the deep, and I want you to put down your net again to catch a fish. And Peter was like a little bit uncertain about that, like, I've just done this all night long, all that kind of stuff, but he obliged. And guess what? He caught the greatest catch of fish that he ever had in his lifetime. Peter, in that instance, knew that everything that he knew about life was a bit miscalculated. It was in the deep that God miraculously met him. And now Peter was hooked. I've lived my life. I've been mending nets. I've been trying and exerting and I've been striving, but it really hasn't given me all that much. And yet when Jesus comes along and he does what I just saw him do, there's got to be more to this thing we call life. And it's because of that miracle that Peter started following Jesus in the first place. Somewhere along the way of following Jesus, you can still question, though, is this what I'm here for? Is there more in this life? We all have those questions. We all want the answers to them. I think Peter was at that place. There's another story later on, kind of in the context of the Gospels, of Jesus meeting Peter once again in the deep waters. I wonder sometimes if Jesus met Peter in the exact same place where Peter miraculously caught those fish, and the story that I'm about to read. It's found in Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. It starts. It says, immediately Jesus, he made the disciples get into the boat, Peter, which was one of those disciples, and go before him to the other side. Well, he stayed back and dismissed the crowds. And after Jesus had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there all alone. But the boat that he sent out with his disciples was a long way from the land now, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. Some translation says the wind was contrary to them. In the fourth watch of the night, though, Jesus came to his disciples walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water, and he came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. Beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of Peter, saying to him, "Oh, you of little faith, why'd you doubt?" And when they got back into the boat, the wind stopped, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." You see, before Peter listened to Jesus' instruction, not really knowing who Jesus was, but he started following him. He started hearing his teaching. He started seeing his miracles. He started seeing how he lived his life. Up to this time that Peter was walking on the water, he had quite the viewpoint, quite the vantage point of Jesus and how to live, how he was living. But this time, when Peter was walking on the water with the knowledge of who it was that was calling forth, he knew. Before, he didn't really know about this Jesus, but in this moment, he knew who Jesus was. And I believe that it's only in the deep where you find the greatest answers to life. In fact, deep intimacy requires deep dependency. Jesus was calling Peter to something much deeper in that moment, and it wasn't just to walk on the water. It was dependency on Christ. That's what Jesus was trying to teach Peter, because Peter was so independent, so self-determined. And sometimes in our lives, we can be so independent and so self-determined to do it our way, to have it in our opinion, to think of it in our way, and just kind of do things without the leading of God. Jesus was teaching this to Peter. It's only in the deep where you learn to walk on God's words. Peter didn't walk on water. He walked on what God spoke to him. And when God speaks to us, The only true satisfaction we can have in this life, in this side of eternity, is found when we step out of the boat onto his words and defy the gravitational pull of what it is that has the power to sink you. Jesus is inviting you to come. He's not inviting you into some lifestyle of religious boredom. He's calling you into the abundant life that can only be filled with his presence. But it's up to you to step out of the boat and onto the water. Jesus says in John 14:6, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes. Again, no one comes. When Jesus said, come to Peter, nobody comes to God, to the Father, except through Jesus. The way of God, the ways of God, Jesus. So coming to God is your purpose in this life. And your life will have meaning and it will have purpose. It will have destiny, identity when you come through Jesus Christ to God. That's what it's all about. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. In order to defy the odds, you have to deny the fear. In order for Peter to walk on water, defying the odds, he had to deny his fear. And so often in our lives, we are afraid to step over that side of the boat and do something that is entirely different than what we've been doing. We've been comfortable. The only place of comfort that Peter would have had in that storm was in that boat. It was a rough storm. They were still certainly afraid. They were fishermen who knew the seas, and they knew that this storm was not good for them. But the only place, the only safety that they would have known of was in that boat. And sometimes we're so just holding the safety ropes, the safety measures in our lives that Jesus has been calling us outside this boat. But we listen so much more to the voice of fear. God wants you to deny your fear today. You see, how you live this life is really stop trying to save your life. That's what Jesus says. Stop trying to save your life. If you lose it for my sake, he says, you're actually going to find life. That's how you find life, is by losing your sense of what you think, your self-perception of what life is all about. Because God has so much more for you. And it goes beyond just the here and the now. The destination isn't this world. It goes beyond this world because you were created for something so much more glorious in God. But you have to step out of the boat. You have to actually deny your fear and deny those voices that want to keep you sitting in a place that's not going to save you, that's not going to fill you, that's not going to lead you, that's not going to bring you into greater purpose of what you're designed for, because you're designed for more. And here's the deal. The only way that you can do that is by coming to Jesus. And I believe that today, right now, Jesus is inviting you to step out of the boat and come to him. It's not just a mere acknowledgement of who he is. It's doing something that you've never done before. Maybe he's calling you to step outside of whatever room you're tuning in with us today and actually come to church and get involved in relationship. Maybe he's calling you to step outside the boat by contacting that person that you've had so much bitterness in your life that's prevented you from real life and real living, and you want to forgive them. Maybe he's asking you to step outside the boat and move past the shame and the guilt and the idea that you somehow have to clean your act up to get to God. That's not what Jesus is all about. Jesus came to us. He came to us. He's not far from us, the Bible says. If you just call upon him, he'll hear you. But you got to make that cry. You got to make that call. You've got to call out to Jesus Christ to save you, just like when Peter was sinking in the water and he said, Lord, save me. Listen, we all need to be saved from all of our past mistakes, all of sin in our lives, because we know that sin, it mars us, it messes us up. We sometimes like sin, but then other times we realize afterwards that it really didn't help us at all. And we need to be saved from it. Well, that's why Jesus came in the first place, to save us from this thing that we call sin, and as well as what sin has to offer us, because sin always leads to death. And that's not just physical death, it's also spiritual death. Listen, dying in our sin separates us from God. And that's not God's desire for your life. He loves you so much that he sent his son to die on a cross for you because of this great love, so that you could have a relationship again with him and that you would not be separated with God. Jesus came to bring peace between you and God and make a way that you could live for eternity in heaven with God and not, well, in hell. Because we choose hell when we decide to push God away. There's so much more to life, but it can only be found in Jesus Christ. And listen, all you have to do is reach out to God and say, Lord, save me. Lord, save me. If that's your cry today, I would love to hear from you. Whether you comment in the live stream feed, or you fill out a prayer request on our website, or you contact our church office. We want to hear from you. We want to pray with you. We want to walk with you and help you to come into this newness of life in Jesus Christ. But you got to take that step. You got to step out of the boat. I'm praying that you do. I'm cheering for you. I know Jesus certainly is. God bless you. We love you. Have a great week.